Hey everybody, good morning. Day 75. Day 75 of spiritual healthcare. So welcome. Welcome to all of you. It's good to be back on this Monday morning. This is going to be a fun Monday. Very interesting Monday. We're going to talk about a really interesting case that I think bears repeating. So welcome to all of you who are joining us. Good morning, Kaz. Good morning, Patricia. It's nice to see everybody coming in this morning. I hope you guys had an amazing weekend. I had a pretty good weekend myself. It was good. It was busy, crazy busy, doing all sorts of stuff. Good morning, Darren. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see everybody back this morning. As I say, I hope you guys had a really good weekend. It poured rain all weekend here, like poured rain, poured rain. But it was a good weekend. It was a good time. It's very cleansing too, the rain, and it keeps the forest fires down here because we get tons of them. So, good morning to everybody coming in this morning. It is good to see all of you. I am excited about this topic today because it is a very legendary case in the United States in Tennessee. And I think it bears repeating just because I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned in it, no matter what side of the coin you fall on. So what we're going to talk about today is the very famous case of the Bell Witch, which took place in Tennessee in the early 1800s. So we're going to chat about that and what we can derive from it, the lessons that we can learn from it, because there is so much in there on so many different levels that we can kind of break down. And we're not going to definitely get to all of it because there's so much analysis that you can end up doing. Especially some of you guys I know have been watching the new show that has come out following some of the descendants of the Bell Witch and whatnot, and understanding what had happened, and the descendants of John Bell and people like that. So we're going to break this down. We're going to talk about it today because I think, as I say, there's stuff in there that we can look at and start to break down and understand. I hope you guys had a great weekend. It's kind of been a little crazy out there over the last little while. And I know, like, keeping our attention on our piece, on what we can do moving forward from here, in all sorts of different areas is going to be something that, we're all focused on in the next little while. I'm going to post a video today. This is going to be a to-do for you guys, which I really loved. And it came out on OWN, and I'll tell you guys about it right now as we're kind of like just, ramping up and waiting for people to come in. There was a featurette on the OWN network that I'm gonna post the full episode for you guys on the Entity Seeker site, and it's called Deconstructing Fear. And it's brilliant. It is with the lovely Iyanla Van Zant, and it's about deconstructing human fears, and so not only does it apply, of course, to our general subject, which is the paranormal, but they're talking about things like fear of other people, fear of the unknown, fear of, like, all of that stuff they start to cover, and it's really brilliant, and I thoroughly enjoyed it the other day. So I'm gonna post that link for you guys so you can watch it as well. It's like 45 minutes, but it's really, really good. So I hope you guys can check that out. So as we go along, the Bell Witch, I know people have heard the name. Some people associate it with the Blair Witch now because of all the films and whatnot that have come out. But the Bell Witch dates back a long time. It dates back to North Carolina, to a place called Red River, and it's called, like, the Red River Bottomland, basically, and that's in Robertson County, Tennessee. So Red River was like this brand new community at the time. And eventually it then became Adams, Tennessee. Okay, so it evolved from there. And the story and the case has been debated back and forth whether it's folklore or whether this actually happened, but there's been plenty of affidavits and plenty of evidence, in my opinion, to support the fact that it did occur. And the case itself, the way it gets broken down, you can start to see reflections of this case in other paranormal instances and cases that have been documented, such as the Enfield case. So you guys, for those of you who have were with me closer to the beginning of spiritual healthcare, we did an hour or so on the Enfield case, the Enfield haunting in England, which was featured in The Conjuring 2. And the Bell Witch haunting was very similar. You guys are going to see parallels. between the two of them, which is really indicative of a few different things. So we're going to break that down. So in about 1817, John Bell, who was the father, he had about 4 kids, and he basically was out inspecting his field, and he came across something that was really, really weird. And we see some of this in hauntings. I actually took a case like this very recently here in Alberta, where he saw this very odd looking animal that didn't seem to, the parts didn't seem to mesh together. So this one had the head of a rabbit and the body of a dog, and it creeped him out to the point where he shot at it, and it just seemed to disappear. He had no idea where it went. He was really freaked out by it though, because it just didn't seem to match. It was almost like whatever it was trying to take a different shape, and it wasn't quite coming out right. So this ended up just continuing that evening when the family started hearing the beating sounds on the outside walls of their cabin. So something was like just banging on the walls, shaking the foundation. It was really weird, and it creeped them out to the point where, and it was happening like every night after that. They started experiencing these weird noises, and the family, like the kids, would go outside, you know, with a gun or whatever, and they'd run to try to catch whatever it was that was doing this, and there was never anything there. They always came back, you know, really confused. And it wasn't long after that the kids started complaining of having like bed covers pulled off of them, pillows tossed to the floor, like they were getting directly assaulted. So whatever it was seemed to like be coming into the house. So it was a really strange progression of circumstances, but of course not unlike what we've talked about and heard when it comes to this type of a haunting. And when we get a negative haunting that typically follows these parameters, like what I wrote about in Teaching the Living, my nickname for them is the immediate aggressor, where it's within a very short amount of time, where there's the initial incident and then there's violence that erupts very, very quickly afterwards. And it's typically, it's just a very aggressive, and within like 48 hours, you know you're in trouble. So as time went on, basically the family kept hearing like whispering noises, voices, what sounded like a woman, but like singing things like hymns. Like it was very strange. And the Bell's youngest daughter, Betsy, who is going to become the focus here in a second, was the one that ended up really seeming to be the target. And when we get an immediate aggressor personality like this with these entities, what often happens is that they kind of pick somebody to dominate. They pick a target that is usually the person that's having the most emotional trouble, and they start to hammer on that, because the person's just not stepping up to any sort of a leadership role, which is oftentimes what these entities are looking for. They're looking for to establish a hierarchy, and that hierarchy they want to establish very quickly. So in the same way that you'd get a dog pack that had a weaker member that the alpha male would start to nip at and target, you kind of see the same patterns with immediate aggressors. So she began experiencing a lot of physical aggression, scratching, biting, hitting, all sorts of crazy stuff. It would grab her hair a lot and slap her, and all sorts of things. And they didn't know what to do, because John Bell, their dad, basically said, like, we can't tell anybody about this, because who the hell is going to believe us? They're going to label us, you know, they're going to label Betsy a witch. Like, there's going to be a whole thing. So there was a fellow and a neighbor that they did end up trusting. His name was James Johnson, and he and his wife spent the night at the Bell home, and they were not immune to any of the phenomenon that's going on, which is typical of the immediate aggressor. They don't care whether there's somebody in the house or not. They're not like some of the other entities that will put on a bluff and try to hide what's going on. They will turn around and hands down just you know, go all out on whoever, which is typically can be dangerous for investigators. So we have to be really careful about that. But Johnson basically ended up getting out of his bed in the middle of the night after being hit himself, and basically said, you know, who are you? What do you want? But after he confronted it, everything calmed down. So then at that night, everything chilled out and calmed down. So the sons, interestingly enough, so this is kind of cool. This is a little bit of American history that most people don't know and don't talk about. So the three Bell sons, Jesse, Drury, and John Bell Jr., ended up fighting under General Jackson in the Battle of New Orleans. Okay, so in 1819, Andrew Jackson ended up visiting the Bell farm. He actually came out himself because he was like, what is going on? What is going on with my soldiers? He was fascinated. He was like, I have to know, like, we have to solve this. So he ended up actually coming out to the Bell farm, which is usually, it was not something that is typically common, of course. And after pulling the cart and horse up near the farm, the horses refused to go on the property. They just refused. They would not go. They just like stopped in their tracks and said, no way. They couldn't get them forward, but they did start hearing a voice that seemed to be emanating from nothing. And we saw this, a similar phenomenon with this in the Enfield haunting in the 1970s, where this voice seemed to just come out of nowhere and have fluent discussions. So the Bell Witch case was very similar to that, where people were actually hearing this entity converse with them. And it basically, it threatened the men that Andrew Jackson brought with him. They basically got to the point, and they were attacked so badly that the Jacksons, his men basically begged to get out of there. They were just like, we're out, we're done. But it got to the point where within the next day or so, Jackson and his entourage were basically spotted, headed back to Springfield and Nashville. So they left. And this guy was done. So it's interesting considering this was, an army general. So it goes to show exactly like the level of crazy that was really going on, I think. So where things started to really get worse, as if they could get worse, was when Betsy Bell ended up becoming engaged to a fellow by the name of Joshua Gardner. So Joshua Gardner everybody thought he was great, like super nice guy, and there was a really good relationship there. Except the problem with, and this often has happened with things like this type of entity and their personality, because they see themselves as a dominant force over the person. Any sort of like engagement or anything like a relationship or anything like that is going to set off major red flags, and the haunting will typically get worse, which is exactly what happened in the case of the Bell Witch. So Betsy ends up getting engaged to this guy, really nice guy, and the entity sees it as a threat and just starts losing it. So it started attacking Betsy, it was attacking Joshua, and it got so bad that he basically said, like, we can't get married. Like, this is, you're going to get hurt. This is not working. And it broke off the engagement. And as soon as they were separated, everything calmed right down again. So probably the most disturbing and the most noted part of the story of the Bell Witch was the death of her dad, John Bell. And this case is going to take a turn in a second, so this is a bit surprising, but this is where I think the lessons come in. So John Bell ended up slipping into a coma on December the 19th in 1820, and on the 20th, by the time that the morning of the 20th came up, he was dead. He was dead, and he had suffered horribly. Like, he couldn't swallow, he was a mess. Just a mess. And the entity the entire time had been like laughing and making fun of the situation and taunting the situation, and claimed that it had offed this guy on purpose. So they ended up finding a small bottle of liquid that they didn't know what it was in the cupboard. And when they fed some of this, the cat ended up getting into it, and it killed the cat instantly. So they don't know, of course, they didn't know what it was at the time, because this is the middle of Robertson County, Tennessee, in the 1800s, so they didn't know what it was. But it was pretty, the entire incident was pretty significant. The entity had basically kept claiming over and over and over again that it was going to return, it was going to come back in 100 years, 200 years, and this kind of thing. But there were reports that this activity started to escalate again during those times, but the documentation on that is a little bit on the sketchy side. But in 1828, it did show back up, and a lot of the phenomena ended up revolving around John Bell Jr. But the entity and John Bell Jr. ended up having this very interesting relationship where it talked all sorts of things, like the origin of life. It talked about the need for spiritual reawakening, and even predicted the Civil War. So it was very interesting. Like, it had information that nobody else seemed to have, which is typical with this type of thing. So it's a really interesting case. But where this gets really fascinating for me, and where I want to go with this, is a twist that came about later, and accusations and suspicions that came out about John Bell. Now, there's different versions of this as to exactly what possibly have happened. The film An American Haunting decided to take this angle when they filmed the story, and that was that John Bell was actually targeting and molesting his daughter Betsy. So, plot twist, right? So when we start to look at this, and we start to look at the dynamic, because it seems very, very random until we start to apply what we know about hauntings and paranormal activity that's like this. There had to have been toxicity in the house. There had to have been, you have to be on a pretty rough frequency in order to be attracting something like this into the family experience, especially on such a wide scale. So we have to start to look at what exactly, when we look at this family, what was going on. We know that John Bell had a feud with a neighbor that was close by named Kate Batts. A lot of people blamed her for the haunting, which was, of course, not, it was not accurate. Kate Batts was basically, they threw the label witch on her because they were looking at her. Like, she was very homeopathic. She had lots of sort of natural cures for things, stuff like that. So she ended up being very quickly labeled as a witch. And she was, of course, blamed because she and John Bell had this feud going back and forth. But then you start to break it down, and you start to look at John Bell himself. And as I say, something that was going on between, for example, him and Betsy. And it would start to break down and begin to explain some of what they were experiencing in the house. So when we look at the phenomenon, we can then take it and begin to understand possibly some of the energy that was going on in the home physically. We know that there was a reflection of severe abuse and torment and attacks and things like that. And then the question also becomes, was it the entity that turned around and killed John Bell, or was there something going on underneath? Had Betsy, if the allegations of abuse were true, did Betsy finally have enough and figure out how to end the physical abuse? There were rumors that went around quite readily about John Bell being an extremely hot-tempered guy, and just not making friends in very many places, even though he ended up being named the elder of one of the churches, one of the Baptist churches in the area. But we all know that stuff goes on under the table, behind the scenes. And when we look at the Bell Witch case, I think we have to really, really grasp the fact that even though here we had this guy who was, put up as one of the church elders, he was highly respected in the community, he had all of these things that were going for him, and yet you had this level of toxicity that was going on in the house. So it's interesting to watch this break down. And I've dealt with cases that have been somewhat similar over the years, where this type of a haunting usually does stem from somebody having some sort of trauma that's gone on within either that's currently going on or something that was going on in their past. And the target of the abuse is usually the person that was experiencing whatever this trauma was, because that's their trigger, that's their emotional vibrational trigger. So when we look at the case and we look at what Betsy had, was proclaiming, which was she was the target, she was being, torn from her bed, usually attacked at night, you know, being hit and all sorts of things. But it seemed to be so much centered around Betsy and the claiming of her, that we have to begin to understand that Betsy was probably the ultimate target, for a reason, because she was the one that was ultimately sitting at that vibration. And everybody else was kind of just experiencing what was going on around her. So it's an interesting case. I'm going to post a link to the official Bell Witch page so that you guys can go through it and read about it and whatnot, because it's really fascinating, and you guys can start to break down what this starts to look like, you know, and from what people have documented, because there's quite a lot of it. Lots and lots and lots of information. So I'm going to pass that on so you guys can take a look and be investigators, because I think it is a very telling experience and telling case about how not only is this phenomenon not new, it is steeped in you know, American history and European history and Canadian history, but that there are, you know, when we see this type of experience, how reflective it can be of things that are going on within us, within the family. And of course, this is a pretty extreme case because the Bell Witch is pretty famous, but it's the same. It's all the same. So I wanted to read a little bit, because we talked about negative entities so much. Talk about them so much. I wanted to read a little bit from my great-great-grandfather's book, The 20th Plane, and the intention of non-physical, because I think, and these intelligences, when you do it right, when you know, when you've got a good vibration going, when you've got a healthy state of being going on within you, and what is out there to connect with when things are going really well. So I wanted to read this for you guys a little bit. All right. And I just lost my place. Awesome. Here we go. So this is what they had said to my great-great-grandfather. This is what they passed on to him. And when he was doing his work with the channel Louis Benjamin. And this is what he ended up recording. He said, "In the name of the 20th Plane Group, we send tokens of love, light, and joy. We desire to place on the records of the earth plane the following facts and principles to help all seeking sincere souls. We are as real as when we are on the earth plane. That is, we have qualities by which we shall permanently be known by all who ever knew us. Our motive desire is to bring the reality of this plane of consciousness into definite touch with the consciousness of the earth plane. The process we would use in publication is based on the very important foundation that we do not claim to prove our statement. Things proved are not usually the strongest. The science of the earth plane today is often the fable of tomorrow. We do claim, though, to send conviction, insofar as our revelation brings conviction to your souls." And I just love that. And I think it just goes to show, you know, when we are in connection, when we do this right, what we can end up with. And it's pretty cool. But when it goes wrong, man, it goes really wrong. It's always why, you know, when we're dealing with things like Ouija boards, or, you know, working our way and going into non-physical in any sort of engagement, is to be making sure that we are in our connection. Is so important. One of the theories about the Bell Witch came actually from a teacher of Betsy. Now, one of the ideas behind what had happened was that Betsy herself had manifested this entity, that came from something that she was projecting herself. And where this, there's a couple of schools of thought on this, but one of them had to do with a teacher, a fellow by the name of Powell, who she was quite connected with, and who actually had a massive crush on her. She ended up basically, nothing ever happened with them because she ended up marrying Gardner. But what was interesting was that the idea that she was manifesting this intelligence of some sort came from the idea that Powell was very interested and very connected with the occult, very interested in the paranormal, very interested in getting into this stuff, communicating with this stuff. So one of the ideas and one of the schools of thought is the fact that Betsy actually possibly got into this all from Powell, from her teacher. And because they were, as I say, they were really close, they hung out a lot. There was there was definitely a romantic connection there, and they started to wonder if maybe that might have been how this was kind of introduced to her. So as I say, hard to know. We could go around about this for ages as to what happened, but it's something to think about. So the Bell Witch, interesting case, very, very interesting case. And we get to start to look back on some of these instances, like the Enfield, like the Bell Witch, and start to learn from what was going on during that time period, and of course looking at the the events that were going on in history at that time as well. So we had a lot of heightened upset and anxiety and all of that kind of thing. So you had all of these outside circumstances coupled with the toxicity in the house, and then bam, you end up with this plethora of bizarre activity. So there it is. So anyway, I can't leave you guys without some affirmations, and what we always do, leaving spiritual healthcare. And so I want everybody to take a breath. I'm a channel of peace and well-being, and my need for peace is abundantly met. I can unconditionally accept, love, and appreciate myself and who I am. I recognize and am grateful for the abundance that is constantly flowing into my life, which I can choose to allow or not. I feel with every breath a sense of peace and love. I help others by maintaining and tending to their connection with Source as much as possible. This well-being is accessible to me, even in a sea of uncertainty. At this moment, all is well. I am able to liberate myself from my past and live with peace and serenity. I can see and appreciate all the beauty and abundance around me. I am able to embrace love while letting go of fear. And I find inner peace with the soothing silence of my inner being. And everybody take a breath. So I'm going to post some links for the Bell Witch, so that you guys can take a read of this and see what your take is on the situation, because there's so much. And then there's the other side of it too, where some people believe it never happened, that there was, that none of this existed. So it will be interesting. So you guys can draw your own conclusions on it. But I think it's a fascinating case, and it's a fascinating lesson into our history, the history, of course, of Tennessee, and so much more. So thank you guys so much. We will be back, of course, tomorrow with spiritual healthcare. We'll chat more on all of the things that we work through and love, and just more about this amazing universe that we live in. So thank you guys so much, and I will see you all tomorrow morning on Spiritual Healthcare at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. Bye, everybody.